Good afternoon, everybody. It's Tina Desiree Berg here. I am going to be hosting the Status Coup live stream this afternoon. We have lots to talk about. At the top of the hour, I want to dissect the COVID relief bill that was just passed today. Does it really take children out of poverty? Does it really take anybody out of poverty? We have seen lots of media folks and lots of congressional folks say that it does. So as we wait for more people to log in, I want to play a clip of various folks making these claims that about the COVID relief bill. So let's watch that, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Well, I also need to say a few words about the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who I spoke with many times in this and again this morning. I served in the Senate, as you all know, for many years. I've never seen anyone work as skillfully, as ably, as patiently, with determination to deliver such a consequential piece of legislation that was so urgently needed as the American Rescue Plan. Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer. When the country needed you most, you led, Chuck, and you delivered. Neither I nor the country will ever forget that.
5 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, people often wonder, does government understand what's happening in my life, in my family's life? Despite the arguments of our Republican colleagues that the pandemic has passed, that the economy is fine, no relief is warranted, the truth is more than 500,000 people have died, 4 million small businesses have closed, millions of people are out of work, and relief is needed. The American Rescue Plan will speed up the delivery of vaccines, bolster testing and tracing, and expand access to affordable health care. It puts money up to $1,400 a person right into the pockets of working people. It extends unemployment benefits and gets help to small businesses. Today, with President Biden in the White House and Democrats in control of Congress, we can tell the American people help is on the way. And to listen to my friends on the other side of the aisle, you wonder, where do they live? Because according to them, all this has been resolved. The pandemic is gone. People are back to work. The economy's recovered. That's not reality. This bill will provide desperately needed relief to those we serve. I urge everyone to support the American Rescue Plan, and I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I represent Los Angeles, California, considered by many as one of the epicenters of the COVID-19 pandemic. In my district, working families are struggling to pay bills, small businesses are trying to stay afloat, and countless others are doing everything they can to keep a roof over their heads. They need us to pass the American Rescue Plan. Throughout California, essential workers, many of them Black and Latinos, are keeping our economy running. Frontline healthcare workers are exhausted for caring for their patients day after day, month after month during this pandemic. And local organizations are distributing food every single day to those in need. They need us to pass the American Rescue Plan. And across the country, people are terrified that they or a loved one will get COVID-19 before being vaccinated and end up in the hospital or dead. And they are scared that the American dream is drifting further and further away. They need us to pass the American Rescue Plan. That's why 75% of Americans support this plan. Democrats, Republicans, independents from red states and blue states, they're urging us to pass this plan. And they're urging their members to listen to them. They're urging my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle to not turn a deaf ear to their calls and do the right thing and vote with the Democrats to pass this plan. Thank you, and I yield back.
We will end this terrible plague, and we will travel again and send our kids to school again and be together again. Our job right now is to help our country get from this stormy present to that hopeful future. And it starts with voting aye on the legislation before us. Vote yes on the American Rescue Plan. Vote yes.
Mr. Speaker, one of the earlier speakers said, this is the most dramatic change in labor law in 80 years. And I say, thank God. In the late 70s, a CEO made 35 times the worker. Today, it's 300 to 400 times the worker. And our friends on the other side running around with their hair on fire. Heaven forbid we pass something that's going to help the damn workers in the United States of America. Heaven forbid we tilt the balance that has been going in the wrong direction for 50 years. We talk about pensions, you complain. We talk about the minimum wage increase, you complain. We talk about giving them the right to organize, you complain. But if we were passing a tax cut here, you'd be all getting in line to vote yes for it. Now stop talking about Dr. Seuss and start working with us on behalf of the American workers. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlemen.
Okay, some of you might be wondering why I'm laughing at that last clip. That's Tim Ryan. And if you remember correctly about Tim Ryan, he actually sold a bumper sticker about Bernie saying you don't have to yell. Yet here we have Tim Ryan going full nuclear about workers' rights. And look, what he's saying isn't wrong. Don't get me wrong. What he's saying isn't wrong. He's right about this. But the question is he being sincere? And is he actually willing to do something about enacting structural change? Because that's what we need. So let's talk about this bill that we just passed today. We finally got the COVID relief bill passed. It's going to go to Biden's desk to be signed on Friday. So they're all touting this bill like it's the brand new deal. This is a massive handout to workers' rights. It's going to help Americans get out of poverty. It's going to, my favorite claim thus far, it's going to halve the child poverty rate. We're going to talk about that in depth in a second. So they're acting like this is the new deal, but it's not. This to me is like putting a Band-Aid on a gaping, festering, bloody gunshot wound because it doesn't provide any structural change whatsoever. So in order to get into the nuts and bolts of that, I actually want to go back and talk about the original bill that was passed by the House before it went to the Senate. This is important because the Senate is where we lost some important things like the $15 minimum wage. So the original bill had the unemployment insurance payouts were going to be $400 and not the $300 that they have now agreed to. So they took that down from $400 to $300. And I think it's also important to note that a year ago, under the Trump administration and under the GOP-controlled Senate and Congress, the payments were $600. They were able to pass that. So what has happened here? We now have control of both the White House and both chambers of Congress, and they cut it from $400 to $300. How does this make sense? It should be higher. You promised the American people something more, right? You know, and obviously it also included a federal wage increase of $15 an hour. Now we can get into the arguments of how the GOP didn't support this bill today at all, not a single one of them. That is true. I do think that there is a tension that exists between the traditional Republican Party and the Trump populism that we've seen the last 4 years. There is a tension there, but that's sort of tangential to what the point I'm making is. The Democrats are in charge. They promise structural change. They're touting this bill as a new deal, massive thing, and it's just simply not that. All right, so the bill went to the Senate, and we lost the $15 minimum wage, and this to me is a massive, massive travesty. So the party in power across the board, and they couldn't get this done. In the very least, Biden should have been able to pick up the phone and convince the Delaware senators to support his bill. He's from Delaware. This is his home state. You're going to tell me that he could not convince Coons and Carper to support this $15 minimum wage? You know, they're saying one of the arguments that Carper made was that he wants something to be indexed to inflation. But this is also bullshit, and I'll tell you why. It's bullshit because if minimum wage had been indexed to inflation this entire time, we'd be looking at an inflation rate of or wage of like $22 to $25 an hour. So that fucking horse left the stable, pardon my French. This is a ridiculous comeback. It hasn't been in the past, and to say that's what we need to do now to get this passed is ridiculous. We are so far down the income inequality rabbit hole that this is, even 15 is not going to do it, right? You know, the other thing would be Joe Manchin saying that he could or would support an $11 minimum wage. Now, is $11 enough? No, we already said 15 is not enough. It should be, you know, $25 to $30 in my opinion. But in the very least, they could have taken that compromise and introduced some sort of structural change. Why didn't they? While they were playing, you know, this back and forth game with the conservative Democrats, why didn't they say to Joe Manchin, Carper, Coons, the rest of them, all right, you won't agree to the 15. Will you agree to 11? Let's at least do that. Instead, they abandoned the entire project. This is inconceivable to me. Then they went on and used the parliamentarian as an excuse. You know, we've talked about that. The parliamentarian is an advisory role. They have zero power. This is not a real reason to not do anything. At the very least, Harris could have put the kibbutz on that and, put an end to that. But they chose not to do that as well. Anyway, so now the bill goes back to the House and it passes today. So one of the things that they're talking about that I want to get into the weeds on is what exactly are they using as the poverty line? Because I think that's the real story here, right? They're all saying this is going to lift half of the children out of poverty. Is it? The poverty line that they're using, folks, is for a family of 4 is $28,000 a year. $28,000 a year. I'm going to tell you, without equivocation, that's absurd. This is poverty. $30,000 a year is poverty. $40,000 a year is poverty. To get out of poverty in the city of LA, you need to be making $65,000 to $70,000 a year if you are a family of 4. So yes, by the metrics that they're using, they can make this claim. My point is this: why are we using these metrics in the first place? They're not justifiable. They don't pull anybody out of poverty. It's very frustrating. All right, so on that note, I want to show you some folks what we're talking about here specifically as the $28,000. So I have a site here that sort of breaks down the cost of living. Let's pull that up in Los Angeles so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, so they're saying if you make $28,000 a year, you're out of poverty. I'm saying you're not. So this particular website breaks down the cost of meals if you eat out, McDonald's even, gallons of milk, loaves of bread, just basic stuff. Nobody here is living high on the hog. So a family of 4 estimated monthly costs are $3,800, and that excludes rent. That does not include rent. $3,800 a month, family of 4. That's what you need to be taking in to just get by, to have just a decent life, not even an extravagant life in the least. If we add rent to the mix in LA, that's another $24,000 a year, bare minimum. Because you 4 people, you're going to put them in a 1-bedroom apartment. That's asinine. A one-bedroom apartment rent averages $2,258 in the city of LA. $2,258 for 1 bedroom. You cannot possibly have parents and 2 kids in a 1-bedroom apartment. I mean, you could, and people are doing it now. They're living in cars, for fuck's sake. But that's what we're looking at. So my point is this: the metric that they're using, the $28,000 metric, is ludicrous, and I have not seen a single person bring that up. Nobody in the Congress brought it up in their speeches. I have not seen anybody in the media bring it up. They're all just touting this as the New Deal, but nobody's questioning the underlying fundamentals that are just absolutely broken when what we need, again, is structural change. All right, so let's get into what he's talking about here for the child welfare claim, right? So the claim is based on a child tax credit. So currently the child tax credit is $2,000 a year. So this bill is basically going to increase that to $3,000 per child, or $3,600 per child if the child is under 6 years of age. And it will further extend it to the age of 17. Currently, you're cut off at the age of 16. So these things are good. I'm not saying they're not good. They're going to help, but they are not going to help enough. Here's the other thing to keep in mind. This is only for 1 year. This will phase out in a year. It's not permanent. Maybe if these changes had been permanent, that'd be a much better deal, a much bigger deal, because it would be a step in the right direction. But 1 year of this isn't going to do the things that they're saying it is. And he's claiming that the rate of poverty would fall to 6.6% from 13.4%. But again, that's based on this metric of $28,000 as the baseline of poverty for a family of 4. All right, that's just not going to do it. Not a good thing. So superficially, it's going to help us, but it's not going to bring about the structural change that we need. Anyway, what do you guys think? Go ahead. I wanted to mention, go ahead and tag me in your questions and comments so that I can see them. Otherwise, I won't be able to see them. I'm District 34 in here. All right. Yes, in San Jose. Look, you can look at all the major metropolis areas, whether it's San Jose, you're bringing up San Jose, New York City. Here's the thing to keep in mind. The $28,000 might be an okay number if you live in parts of the Midwest, right? If you live outside of Indianapolis, perhaps. But that's not where the majority of the population lives, is it? The jobs are not there. People live in the city centers because that's where the jobs are. And this is also where it's really tough to make ends meet, even on a $15 minimum wage. So it's absolutely not good enough. All right. So I'm very upset about this, obviously. I think the other thing that we need to look at is in comparison to other countries. So they're also bringing up, obviously, the $1,400. That was a 2K promise. They've settled on the 14. They're touting that as a big deal too, but it's not. We're now looking at the moratorium ending on rents, and people owe $10,000, $12,000 in back rent. $1,400 is not going to handle that. And, you know, it's a one-time payment. If this had been a UBI all along, then perhaps. And maybe they will consider doing a UBI going forward to try to save capitalism. I don't think that they will, though. But we're the only industrialized nation that has not received that, and I think that's an important part of the discussion as well. Every other country has been receiving 80% or higher of their wages from the government, which has allowed them to stay home and not worry about getting evicted, right? Or spreading COVID. And, you know, why are we settling for this in the United States of America? We're supposed to be the richest country in the world. Yet we are here supporting a plutonomy, because that's what it is. When you have 80% of the new wealth going to the 1% year after year after year, that is what you're living under, a plutonomy. And this has been a vicious cycle of power and wealth. Just, you know, it's like the power's here, then they get more wealth because they enact legislation that allows them to extract more wealth. So then it goes back to the power wealth cycle again. So each round of the cycle, they retain more of our bot Congress, more of the rules, laws, and regulations that allow them to extract more wealth, and the working class continues to lose. And I don't know where this ends, because it's untenable now. At some point, there's not going to be any expendable income left in the working class for folks to buy the widgets that the 1% produces. They need us to spend money. In order for this capitalism machine to keep going, we have to consume. It's based on consumption. And at some point, that's going to go, right? We're headed in that direction now. But I don't think it seems to worry them because, A, they're greedy. I mean, that's just the obvious. But B, I think they've hoarded so much wealth, and they're hoarding wealth at the top, so much so that they don't even have to worry about it at this point. I mean, this is where we are. All right, does anybody have questions? Tag me in them, comments, all of that. A couple of the things that are going on this week I want to talk about too. So there's a story that I think got little attention that I spoke with Colin Kalmbacher on, and this has to do with Betsy DeVos. Remember Betsy DeVos? She was education secretary under Trump. She has been running private for-profit schools, ripping students off. Well, now the Biden administration has chosen to defend her in a lawsuit, and it's a legitimate lawsuit that's been brought about. So I spoke with Colin about this, and I wanted to play that interview for you guys. So let's go ahead and play that. You've been doing some interesting pieces lately, but one that particularly caught my eye is on Joe Biden, his administration, and how they are defending Betsy DeVos. And I feel like we have to have a little bit of a conversation about the background here, as Joe Biden is one of the main reasons why student debt is attached to students even now after if they file bankruptcy, it remains. They can't get rid of it. So we're looking at a situation where it's expanding. A lot of the Sallie Mae lenders pretty much have gotten away with murder. We even have folks on Social Security that are having their checks garnished by the government to pay back student loan debt. So in your investigation, you basically found out that there's an ex-Trump DOJ official, Department of Justice official, who is helping to defend Betsy DeVos in her litigation against students that were ripped off by her. So give us a little bit about on the background here, and explain for the audience that it's not a requirement of them, meaning the Department of Justice, to defend Betsy.
Yeah, so I guess the major issue and what kind of made this newsworthy in the first place is that you have a few attorneys with the Department of Justice, these DOJ, basically career officials, most of them, but one of them was specifically hired by the Biden administration. That's Acting Assistant Attorney General Brian Boynton. And they put their names on this document that says the U.S. Department of Justice is representing Betsy DeVos in her personal capacity and as part of a kind of effort to shield cabinet level officials from this kind of scrutiny. the issue here is that these former students who were ripped off by their for-profit colleges, they were scammed. No one disputes the fact that they were scammed. DeVos herself has in the past said in court documents and press releases that this was a bad thing that happened. Though as the leader of the Department of Education, she kind of fought against their interests. There was some administrative foot dragging,
Right.
But overall, everybody agrees that these students are more or less in the right. So what the students want is to perform some depositions and to see kind of what led to the decisions at the Department of Education and find out why it was taking them so long to process these claims, to get them their money back, and so on and so forth. And the Biden DOJ has kind of stepped in and said, no, you know what? You cannot talk to Betsy DeVos about this. We're not going to let you do that. I think they are concerned about setting a precedent of having cabinet level officials having to go on the record and explain their actions in front of well, it wouldn't necessarily be in front of a court, but under oath. And that's essentially what kind of shocked and surprised a lot of folks here. And that's why we did the story.
So they want to protect their current cabinet from possibly being scrutinized in the same way, but that just seems ridiculous to me. Transparency in government, I think, is key. And the Democratic Party itself always seems to be pro-transparency and anti-corruption, yet they do things like this that are just, the optics are absolutely terrible, as far as I'm concerned. Do you think that that's a problem in general for the Democrats?
Well, I mean, the issue is they always run on transparency, right? And they always are keen to point out, and they are correct to point out, that the Republicans are atrocious and horrific when it comes to transparency overall. The Trump administration was very much like its GOP predecessors in that regard. They were very bad with transparency, and the Biden campaign promised that there would be a changing of the guard, that it would be different. They did some iteration of a promise akin to will be the most transparent administration of all time. Obama did the same thing.
Right.
And, they make these pains to transparency, but when the rubber meets the road, they have court filings where they're protecting one of the most hated and vilified members of the former administration. And they don't have to act as her personal attorney, but that's what the DOJ has chosen to do. It is a choice. They are not bound by law. They are not even necessarily bound by precedent. These sorts of depositions have happened in the past. It's not, I wouldn't say it's common, uncommon, or rare. It's, I would say it's highly fact intensive. That's my attorney brain speaking for a second. I don't want to categorize them as being something that like, oh yeah, this happens all the time, or this doesn't happen all the time. I think it highly depends on the facts. And here there's just, as far as I can see, no reason whatsoever for them to step in. It's like, again, generally undisputed that these students were scammed, that they have valid factual claims. And it is also more or less undisputed that the Department of Education did something wrong here.
Yeah.
In fact, several federal courts have sanctioned the Department of Education under Betsy DeVos for doing something wrong here. So under this specific fact pattern, it just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever for the Biden administration, for the Department of Justice to say, we're her personal attorney. No, you can't put her under oath and ask her about her job. It really boggles the mind. It's the opposite of transparency.
And Betsy DeVos runs for-profit universities. That's what she was doing prior to taking this job in the Trump administration. And the Democratic Party also has been keen in some areas with privatization, including schools. Their support for charter schools would be one example. Do you think that there's a relationship here, or is it simply the concern that they don't want to set a precedence as far as being able to put their cabinet members under oath?
We didn't really touch upon that in any of our reporting. I think if you want to see some more information about that, I would look to the Republic report. David Halperin is a journalist who is doing a lot more on those specific angles.
Okay.
But my general answer to that question is that the money is always important. I don't think it should go undiscussed or unreported. In this specific instance, I can't say, but I do remember that the Obama administration was very keen on charter schools, very big on privatization. A lot of their high-level appointees, including essentially Obama's handpicked senator for Colorado, Michael Bennet, he comes from that background.
Right.
So it's no surprise to me that you know, the phrase "strange bedfellows." There's nothing strange about it. These people are all kind of cut from the same cloth, but we didn't necessarily touch upon any of that in our reporting. So I should probably defer to David Halpern's work again in the Republic Report. He did the first story on this that kind of put us on the trail. We picked up a whole bunch of the extra court documents after that. He does good stuff, and I would check him out for sure.
Okay, excellent. Good recommendation. Okay, so some really good questions and comments in the chat. I wanted to address some of them. Also, I wanted to thank some folks for the super chats. Tony, Biden could change the definition of poverty, and that would be substantive if he did that. I agree. The problem is how they're defining poverty, right? If they're saying I'm having the child poverty rate and it's dependent on a definition of $28,000 for a family of four, there's a problem. There's a clear problem, right? But if we change that poverty rate and say that it should be, you know, $35,000 or $40,000, then that entire argument goes poof, doesn't it? He's no longer having the poverty rate. And again, keep in mind, this is just for 1 year. This will be phased out at the end of the year. So this is not structural. It's not lasting. It's not permanent change. Somebody brought up the fact that the child tax credit only helps people with kids. This is also true. What about single folks? Well, that definition for poverty is slightly under $13K a year. So $13K a year in the city of Los Angeles, are you kidding me? You can't even pay rent on that. That's ridiculous. And in many ways, I think it's more difficult for single folks because there's only one income. Even though there's only one person in the household, they're still going to have to pony up the same amount of rent for a one bedroom that a family of four does, right? Because they need that space. So in many ways, they are hurting too, and they need some help. We need to just structurally change what's going on in the country, and this bill's not going to provide that structural change. It's a Band-Aid on a gaping gunshot wound that's festering, and it's not the New Deal that we need. Dana, you brought up Henry Ford paid his workers a living wage so that they could buy his cars. And then somebody responded that Henry Ford was a Nazi sympathizer. Both of those things are true. He absolutely was a Nazi sympathizer, so he does not get credit for that. But it is an interesting point you're making about the living wage. I think this, it sort of highlights a fundamental change that's happened in the country about how folks, capitalists view. All right, live TV, folks. We're having a massive storm here in LA. Well, for LA, it's massive, so maybe Spectrum is having issues again. Anyway, but point being is that at that time, capitalists understood in order to be successful, there had to be money in the hands of consumers in order to buy your goods. That's how growth happened. That's how you grew your business, right? But now that's changed due to globalization, among other things, right? So now we could look overseas for not only cheaper labor, but also markets to sell in, right? So if somebody in the United States can't afford whatever this widget is, it's possible that somebody in another country can. The market simply expanded, and all of those things that go with it came into play. So now we're in a country where we mainly manufacture arms. I mean, that's the truth, and things of that nature. And we no longer manufacture things like televisions or electronics. Like that entire manufacturing industry went poof at the same time. So we're just in a different environment now than we were during the time of Henry Ford. But it doesn't mean that eventually we'll run out of runway on both the global market and chasing cheaper wages. Eventually those things are all going to come to a boiling point, and I think we're almost there now. Because the other part of that equation is people have run out of credit as well. You can only consume so much on your credit card or any kind of credit you're given. Eventually that dries up as well. So we need fundamental change in the country. But thank you, Dana, for bringing up that point. It's an interesting one. So has anybody paid attention to what's going on in Nevada? I want to switch gears to something that's much more positive now that we've discussed all the problems with Biden's bill and its lack of structural change. So in Nevada, we had a changing of the guard over the weekend, and it was a progressive sweep of the Democratic state party. So the DSA and a group called Left Caucus were able to basically replace the entire slate with their folks. So all of the Harry Reid people are now gone, and it's now DSA people coming in. I think this is not shocking if you've been following the trajectory of the last year. Bernie Sanders absolutely swept that primary, like swept it. There was no competition. In every single one of those caucuses, he was just winning all the votes. And a lot of that was coming from the Hispanic vote and also the union vote in the state. And the DSA had been organizing those votes for quite a while. So, and then over the summer, you saw a second wave where they swept the board positions at a summer election. So now that they've taken over the entire party, I expect to see some interesting things come out of Nevada. I also think this is a bright spot in the sense that here is an example of where progressives can force change within the Democratic Party. So Dem exit isn't necessarily the solution. Here we see the opposite happening. Here we see progressives working really hard to get into these powerful positions and control the state party machinations. And with that, they're going to be able to make major changes happen. So I spoke with Dan Roll, who is an activist there in Las Vegas, who has been very part and parcel, very much part of the change. He worked on some of these DSA campaigns. He also ran for office. But I spoke with him about the changes and what's going on at that situation. So I wanted to play a clip of that interview as well. So, Dan, this is a wild story. The entire Democratic state party was pretty much replaced with Democratic Socialists of America candidates, clean slate straight across. And in response, the establishment Democrats that were holding those positions before and the staff, the actual staff that works for the Democratic state party, resigned. So this is just crazy to me that they would throw that kind of a temper tantrum, especially given that they were running as a unity ticket, which was even in the name of the slate, right? Progressive Unity or something of this. What's actually happening here?
Yeah, I think one of the stories about all this in this whole conversation is that up until this Saturday, the 6th, as much as the establishment, as much as sort of the body politic in Nevada would say, oh, we anticipated this happening, we thought this would happen. The reality is, on the ground, that simply wasn't the case. Every major elected official in the state of Nevada had backed this, what they called the unity ticket. And I mean, all the way up to, literally, there is no elected official in the state of Nevada who backed the progressive slate. There wasn't a single one.
Wow.
Everyone choosing to back who was already a very progressive candidate. I mean, let's be honest, either candidate was a Democratic socialist. But what was really clear was that as the progressive wave, which started in 2016, then grew legs in 2018 when Amy Villela ran for Congress in Nevada, and then further grew legs in 2020 when Bernie absolutely decimated the Biden ticket in Nevada. And did what many people said was impossible, which was to win Nevada.
He won it by a landslide. I was there. It was amazing.
Yeah, in some instances 2-1, which was just incredible. And then we saw this sort of circular, motion by the Democratic establishment to essentially, let's not say essentially, every other party their phone calls were made, things happened, and they really focused their energy and effort around Biden. Similarly, what you have in Nevada is a party establishment which is run through the state organization. And I think we are all involved in politics a lot, so it's easy to get myopic when we look at this. But I think let's think of it as a voter in Nevada. If you're a registered Democrat, the Nevada State Democratic Party is from a brand perspective, what you think of as representing you in the state that you live in. It's the state party of your state, ideologically, your values. And so a lot of people in their first sort of gut instinct is to just believe the party and to sort of say this is my team, they're on my side. And so that's sort of been what it has been for the last few years. At any rate, after this massive sort of unexpected, I shouldn't say unexpected, after this massive, well-deserved, well-earned victory in the caucus, a lot of the pieces of that organizing that happened in Nevada still remained with the goal of moving the needle forward. And so you had that infrastructure actively participating in local politics, getting getting on the boards, doing everything that the party will always tell you. When you try to make change in the Democratic Party, they will always say, hey, you know, there's a way that we do this. Hey, slow down.
Yeah, that's
Just,
true.
you know, you got to understand this is a private organization. You got to follow the rules. You got to show up at the meetings. You got to put in the time. You got to make the phone calls. And so, you know, the crew at Left Caucus, the crew at the Las Vegas Democratic Socialists, they did the work over a period of 2 years to show up to the meetings, to get people engaged. While I will note, also building the most effective community aid organizations in Southern Nevada. So you're doing all this sort of political machinery in the background while having this true benefit of mutual aid, which, you know, for example, in the pandemic, Las Vegas DSA organized hundreds, actually thousands of deliveries of food when people are really suffering. They developed a mutual aid fund where we were able to provide funds for people who are struggling, things our own local elected officials struggled to do.
Yeah.
And continues to build this network, this diverse, broad group of people. And so where that all came to a head after the presidential election, which is another pause point, where, learning from the lessons of 2016, the progressive activists this time said, no, we are not going to make this a conversation of, you know, the very, very left versus the establishment. There's a goal ahead of us, which is to win the presidential election. And so, in spite of being challenged, sort of, you know, kicked to the curb in some instances, all of those progressive activists in Nevada and really around the country showed up, and we got Joe Biden elected, and then we showed up again, and then we got 2 senators elected, and we took control of the Senate. And we owned up to that part of that agreement, right? We did the work on the ground. So lo and behold,
and the establishment didn't seem to appreciate that, did they?
Or even recognize it,
which is crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, we're still seeing some of the sort of toxic conversation that's often lobbed at the very, very progressive end of the party around, you know, calling people Bernie bros is just that classic line, or talk in Nevada. Anytime there's a conversation about progressive activism, somehow this conversation about violent Bernie Sanders supporters throwing chairs in 2016 comes up, and it's just absurd.
It's absurd. It didn't happen. Why is that story still being propagated? And in fact, a local journalist, is it Ralston report?
Yeah.
He had a scathing report this week on the progressives, and he was trying to poo-poo this win that you just had, and saying that was the end of the Democratic Party in the state of Nevada. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever read. If anything, the opposite is true. I've never seen such engagement as I did last year during the primary. The fact that Bernie Sanders absolutely swept that, and I had spent the whole week there. I had been at several of his functions. I had attended many other presidential caucus issues that were going on that week. I interviewed Tom Steyer, so it wasn't just Bernie I was covering, but there was absolutely the largest groundswell of progressive voters I have ever seen anywhere. So for him to just completely act as if that didn't happen is absolutely insane. If anything, the DSA and Left Caucus, et cetera, have brought more people into the Nevada State Democratic Party. They've brought voters that might have gone to Republicans because they're hurting financially.
Yeah. Brought in and you know, let's give credit where credit is due. Judith Whitmer, the new head of the Nevada State Democratic Party, absolutely did the groundwork.
Yeah.
Brought in a diverse you know, and when you say bringing in voters, it's a lot more complicated than just telling someone to go show up and vote on election day. It's all of the logistics of getting them energized. Do you know where to go vote? Do you know how to? Can you drive someone? Can you bring someone? All of those things happened really without credit. And again, like, up until Saturday at about 2 p.m., I really do not believe anyone in the establishment, in spite of the financial mechanisms that they were doing as an emergency brake, really thought that this would happen. It was a very interesting vote. But what's also interesting is, I mean, you mentioned John Ralston. John Ralston, the quote political expert of Nevada, said that Saturday was going to be this bloodbath. He said it was just going to be a bloodbath. It's going to be embarrassing. You know, that there was no chance this was going to happen. I'm paraphrasing him, of course, but he set the narrative that this was impossible. Lo and behold, the activists showed up, led by Judith and an amazing progressive slate, and they won the ticket. And I guess what I would say there to that argument is, when the Democratic establishment has said you got to show up, you got to do the meetings, you got to put in the time, make the phone calls, send the text messages, I want to acknowledge that Left Caucus, DSA, under Judith's leadership, and a lot of other great people, Amy Villela, Amy's former campaign manager, Union Court, they all did that work, and it had an amazing payoff. And we will look back at what happened on March 6th in 20 years or 30 years from now. And because you often talk about the Democratic Convention in 1968. That's a huge moment. Change power structure, change political structure. People will look back at when the Democratic Socialists took control of the state party in Nevada as a profound and formative moment in American politics. And it's profoundly because it is a group of people who do not have access to political power structure, who do not have access to the kind of corporations who can write a $250,000 check to a PAC, and who do not have access to what we in Nevada refer to as the Reid machine, this former network of campaign staffers from Harry Reid. They did it without that. They did it with people who have, who are struggling, people who are looking for jobs right now, people who have their own troubles that they go to when they're done with that meeting on Saturday. And it's a really great story. It's a model for what's going to happen if the left has courage, which I believe we do, to move the needle forward politically.
And interestingly enough, some of the ex-Reid employees were also work for the Bernie Sanders campaign. So some of those folks weren't entirely committed to the establishment, I think, even when they were working for Reid. But you're right, that is his old mechanism that's still been in play for many years now, and it just completely crumbled. And it's surprising to me that it's a shock, because if you've been paying attention to that wave I was talking about at the primary, going forward, it wasn't just the primary, right? The DSA was very formative in that massive win that Bernie Sanders had in the state. And I think they were also very formative in getting out the Hispanic vote, which was a massive turnout that day. And it's why Bernie Sanders won. T.O. Bernie, right? Very formative. I want to talk about some of the financial things that are going on, because the Democratic Party has just, the things they do with consultant money is just beyond belief to me. They take all of these donations and they funnel it usually to 5 or 6 major chunks of money to 5 or 6 consultants. There's a lot of quid pro quo that goes on. This is just a rinse, wash, repeat cycle that I've seen from the party. And this story we're talking about right now has proven to be not an exception. So, they moved $450,000 into the DSCC coffers, and I believe that money is going to be used to support Catherine Cortez Masto and her reelection coming up. But that's not the only money that they moved over, right? And I also think Cortez Masto, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but did she not previously ask Whitmer to drop out of this race a few months back?
Yeah, and I think what in the view of many on the left in Nevada is that with this wave of progressive activism and the citizenry getting power where it belongs, honestly, that you have this notion when you see look what happened with AOC, right?
Right.
The AOC replaced the third most powerful congressman in the United States Congress, the head of communications for the congressional Democrats. That's who AOC replaced, with a model like this. And I think when you see this kind of groundswell of activism in Nevada, I think there is a legitimate, fair concern among big ticket Democrats that when you look at a group capable of 2-1 beating Joe Biden in the primary, that is a legitimate primary threat if you're a senator or a member of Congress. And that's not to mention that you have one of the most popular congressional candidates on the left in the last 10 years, in Amy Villela.
Amy's great. She's a fighter.
Yeah, waiting for that. She is a fighter, waiting for that opportunity to really, finish the work that she started of advocating for working people in this country. And it is a legitimate threat. Now, what's interesting is that Judith did commit to helping her get reelected. And I don't speak for the state party at all. But what I would tell you is that as someone who's in the activist space, I believe, and many in the left in Nevada believe, if an elected official in our state is not comfortable with delivering to the needs of the activist base, and really when we say the activist base, these are things everyone wants. When you poll time and time and time again, these are policies Americans want. Affordable living minimum wage, $15 an hour. That's just the start, by the way.
Medicare for all.
Helping their kids work. Yeah, Medicare for all.
These are policies that are popular across the board. Yeah,
Democrat, Republican. and the idea that somehow these are radical, crazy ideas. That does not immunize you from accountability just because you have the D next to your name. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. And that's maybe a conversation for another day. But I think seeing the groundswell, Catherine Cortez Masto had allegedly reached out and encouraged Tick Segerblom to run for the spot. And I think that kind of backroom power brokering was the first mistake, because it was pretty transparent.
Yeah.
And I think once it became apparent to everyone that the establishment's goal to suppress activism was to take an ally and put them in the position to sort of prevent the rest of the groundswell of activism, that was, I think, the first mistake. Right. The next mistake was in failing to really have any substantive conversation with anyone else on the other side of the ticket. And so in lieu of that conversation, activists did what they always do, which was build strength and power. Right. And we got butts in seats on those Zoom calls, and we got people to show up and have their name counted.
All right, so I wanted to thank some folks for some super chats. Tony DeMio, thank you for the $4.99. Biden could change the government definition of poverty, and that would help so many. 100%, 1,000% agree with you. This would be a start to structural change, because basically the premise for all the arguments they're making is that this number, $28,000 for a family of four, is all of a sudden not going to be poverty anymore. And this is just absolutely not the case, as we discussed earlier. Robin Bennett, thank you for the $5. I appreciate that. Gato Love, thank you for the $5. I did want to answer this super chat on the Nevada Democratic establishment. Thank you, John, for the $5. He says, if the Nevada Democratic establishment personnel weren't expecting the Dem Socialists to win, why did they empty the coffers of $450,000 beforehand? I actually think they did expect them to win. This is just my opinion right now. And can I tell you, it's more than the $450,000 that is being reported. The $450,000 that you're referencing went to the DSCC. This is the money that they use to support Senate candidates. And I believe they want to use that money to spend on Catherine Cortez Masto's reelection. She's going to be coming up for reelection. So that was $450,000 went to DSCC. But there was almost $2 million that was transferred out to other consultants. One of the biggest one was that I noticed was GPS Impact. They're a media advertising agency based in Des Moines, Iowa. And I think it's really telling that all of these consultants took the money and run, because they also walked away. When all the staff rage quit, the consultants went with them. So, the plus side of this is maybe they needed to clean house, and maybe this is an opportunity for the party to be not only more transparent about where the money's going, but to maybe not be funneling large cash dollars into the coffers of 5 consultants, right? Maybe this is what needed to happen. It remains to be seen. I do have more hope than I would if it had been another group of people. I did talk to many of these DSA folks when I was there at the Nevada caucus. They really are committed to change. They are the reason that Bernie Sanders swept that caucus. I could say that without equivocation. So all eyes on Nevada, because if this happens to enforce real change, I think that could be a model for across the country. Also, a couple more super chats. Jim Bassett, I think you had a question, and let me see if I can stroll and find it. I didn't write it down. Jim, where are you? Jim. Oh, there you are. Leslie Wheeler, also thank you for the $5. Appreciate that. We will definitely keep it up. Jim, I cannot find your question. Can you type it out again? All right, so while Jim's doing that, and I think we'll gather more of the super chats and questions, I wanted to switch gears and talk about Biden again on one more thing, because this is the capper of all the cappers. This is like the cherry on the "are you fucking kidding me" sundae. So now Biden has come out and said, wait for it, that he doesn't support getting rid of the filibuster. This is outrageous. You can't even get your own party in line, and now you're going to say you're not going to undo the filibuster? They're going to stop everything you try to do unless we get rid of the filibuster. I think that we can say that without equivocation. So I wanted to play a clip really quickly of the press secretary talking about this on MSNBC.
Joining us now. Well, joining us now, we can talk about this issue with White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Jen, it's great to have you on the show.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Good morning. Great to see you. Let's start with the filibuster. We know the president wants to keep it intact. Does that mean for all legislation? Is there any possibility for some exceptions?
Well, look, as you know, Mika and Joe, he was in the Senate for 36 years, and his preference, as you said, is not to make changes to the filibuster. And he wants to leave the door open to bipartisan work. And people may say that's naive or they may be frustrated, but he feels he's only 40 days into his administration, and he wants that door to be open so that Republicans and Democrats can work together on legislation moving forward.
So, Jen, how important is this voting rights bill? That is probably going to be up next in the House and the Senate. How important is it that Democrats figure out a way to stop Republicans from doing what they're doing in Georgia, what they're doing in Iowa, doing what they're doing across state legislatures across America, where they want to make it harder for Americans to vote?
You're absolutely right, Joe, and it's outrageous, and I loved what, I'm going to steal what Casey said, and they said the quiet part out loud, and it shouldn't be harder for people to vote. And if people have the best ideas, they should want more people to vote. That's something the president absolutely believes. You talked about the legislation, of course, that's working its way through Congress. What we're seeing out there is Democrats are trying to figure out a path forward. They want this legislation to pass. The president wants this legislation to pass. And most importantly, making sure more people have access to voting, to be able to vote, and making it easier, something that's a core value for the president for his presidency. So he'll push for this, and he's going to keep looking for ways to get that done over the course of the next couple months.
Hey, Jen, it's Willie. Good to see you this morning. We know that the president has reached out to Republicans, both publicly and privately, to get this legislation passed. It looks like at the end of the day, he won't get a single one of them to vote in either the Senate or the House for its passage. So what did you learn, and what did the White House, what did the president learn?
Pause this. He reached out to the Republicans, but he couldn't get his own party folks in line. He couldn't call the Delaware senators and get them in line. I mean, I don't know what they're trying to sell here. This is outrageous. Carry on.
About what Washington is going to look like for the next 3.5, 4 years if you can't get Republicans on board for a bill that is this publicly popular.
Well, I think we've all learned that Republicans living in this zip code are outliers to where the American people are. And I know you talked about this a little bit earlier in the show. Some people who are Republicans can explain that more to the rest of us. But the majority of the country supports this bill. The majority of Republicans across the country support this bill and package. And I think this is really going to require a moment of self-reflection for Republicans who aren't supporting getting checks to almost 160 million Americans, money to reopen schools, money to vaccinate people. Since when is that a Democratic idea? It's an idea that most Americans support, and maybe they need to look a little bit inside about why they're opposed to it.
The progressives, and I'm sure you're hearing from a lot of them, including many in the Senate, would tell you this very process tells you why you need to get rid of the filibuster. There's no way you're going to get 60 votes on anything. You just have to go on a straight majority for the rest of the president's presidency. What do you say to those progressives? What do you say to people like Bernie Sanders?
Wait for it.
Well, first, Bernie Sanders called this one of the most sweeping pieces of legislation in modern American history. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but some version of that. And this is a bill that was supported by not just him, but also Senator Joe Manchin. So Democrats really stuck together on this. I will say, Willie, that there's a lot of lessons a lot of us who've worked in government and even in the White House before, including the president, have learned. He didn't sit around and wait for negotiations to continue for months. He supported using the reconciliation process to get this bill through and get it passed. That does mean it looks to be headed on a...
This is outrageous that she's claiming this right now, because that's absolutely not true. If he had supported the reconciliation process, we wouldn't be in the place we are now. We would have a $15 minimum wage. This is outrageous. Instead, he let the parliamentarian control everything, someone that is just an advisor that has no power. And meanwhile, he couldn't get these 8 senators to back his proposal, 2 of which are from Delaware, his home state. I mean, I don't understand how she goes on MSNBC and makes these claims with a straight face. Carry on.
Party line vote, but he wasn't going to play games and wait for relief to get to the American people. So that is a way that it moved forward, it passed, but we're going to keep the door open moving forward, Willie, because look, there are things like infrastructure investment. Traditionally, historically, there's been bipartisan support for that. Everybody wants to rebuild roads, railways, and bridges.
Support for
there's
the $15
been historic support
wage.
for modernizing our immigration system, and he wants to talk to Republicans and Democrats about getting those things done.
This is just a remarkable thing to me. For him to now say that he doesn't support ending the filibuster because of these reasons, it's just ridiculous. I think we can all see through this, right, for what it is. So, wow. Anyway, I did get the question back. Can Nevada get first primary status? So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on your question. I think you mean like taking over where Iowa is, the Iowa caucus being the first. Right now, Nevada actually is first in the West. And believe it or not, that happened because Reid wanted it to happen, and he wanted to tie that to questioning folks supporting whether or not Yucca Mountain was used as a dump for nuclear waste. I know that seems like a random sidebar bit of information, but that's how they became the first of the West caucus. I do think it's worth looking into if you have a really progressive state backed by a progressive Democratic Party leadership. That could make a difference in the way things go for the rest of the country. So I'm hoping that I'm understanding your question correctly. Anyway, back to the filibuster, because I just can't let this go. So here she is saying that, all right, first of all, when she says that these policies have support in both parties, she's absolutely correct. If you look at the voters and what they want, a plurality in both parties want these things. They want to be raised out of poverty. They're tired of just working really hard for not being able to make ends meet. These are popular positions. And let me add to that. If the Republicans decided tomorrow to left flank the Democrats on this and say, we support a $15 minimum wage, you could put a pitchfork in the Democratic Party. It would be over. That would be it. Done deal, right? But here's what the reality is, in my opinion. Biden doesn't want to get rid of the filibuster because he doesn't actually want these policies. If he did want these policies, we would have them. They're popular. He would be able to get all of these other guys in line. In the very least, he could have gone back to Manchin and said, okay, you won't support 15. You're saying you support 11. Let's do 12 or 13 and split the difference. But again, once again, he's chosen not to do any of these things. So my point is I don't believe the actual will is there. I think they're giving lip service to the voters because they know these policies are popular. And that's where it ends. So if we don't end the filibuster, we're in trouble. Because this particular bill, because it was budget reconciliation, was filibuster proof, meaning that we only needed a majority to pass it, right? Going forward, that's not going to be the case. And we don't have 60 votes. We couldn't get the 50, so we don't have the 60. Minimum wage as a standalone bill will absolutely be filibustered, and it will die. It's not going to happen. So Jen Psaki getting on MSNBC and saying these things is just absolutely outrageous. All right. So I think we might have a few more questions here that I missed. I want to make sure if you have any questions, make sure you tag me in them so I can see them and I'll get to them. But what do you guys think about this? Do you agree on the filibuster? Do you think that this is just a dead end for the Democratic Party where they don't actually want to make the structural changes necessary? You know, I think we have to remember that, in my opinion, at least, they're still trying to serve two masters, right? They want to serve the corporate donors that fund all of the things that they do. And they're also saying that they want to, serve the working class, but clearly these things are at loggerheads. And I think the other thing that's happening that we can't ignore is right-wing populism. Trump came into power due to right-wing populism, and the fascist side of that is scary as hell, right? It's scary as hell because he uses racism and a host of other things, authoritarianism, things that we don't want to see happen. But there is an income inequality pain out there. And if we don't give a left exit, meaning a left exit to income inequality, if we don't offer the people something better than what we're giving them now, they will make a turn again to right-wing populism. And I think whatever comes after Trump is scarier because it's probably going to be somebody that's far more effective. It was to our benefit that Trump was a clown. He couldn't get a lot of that scary stuff done. Well, down too, I suppose. Anyway, that is my 2 cents on the situation. I think we're in a bad position right now. I think going into the 2022 cycle, the Democrats are going to take some hard losses if they don't switch gears right now. They're not listening to the voters. They're trying to tout what is just kind of a Band-Aid as another New Deal, and it's simply not that. And if they don't do this stuff, I think 2022 is going to be a bloodbath. Anyway, we have a super chat. So reconciliation is available 3 times a year, right? And how does the parliamentarian get chosen? These are excellent questions. 3 times a year, I think that might be right, but I'm not 100% positive. And as far as the parliamentarian, look, the Republicans, believe it or not, fired the parliamentarian when she did something that they didn't like. The parliamentarian could go. And, you know, I've sat through so many DNC meetings where I've seen parliamentarians basically, you know, find reasons to support what the leadership wanted, right? So the parliamentarian isn't literally digging through Robert's Rules of Order and saying this is the way it has to be. We have to follow this. There's all kinds of loopholes and ways you can maneuver through Robert's Rules of Order. I think that's sort of understood. So again, I think this is a ridiculous excuse because it just doesn't hold water on multiple levels. Holy shit, MSNBC has gotten bad, I agree. No 2 ways about that. All right, so my 2 cents, again, is that this is not the great New Deal that we were looking for. There's zero structural change. Children are not going to be lifted out of poverty. Will their lives improve for a year? Yes, but again, this is a Band-Aid, and we need more. We need desperately more structural change if we're going to improve things in the United States. All right, with that, I am going to let you all go. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon. And Jordan is still working on his piece, but I think he'll be streaming later on in the week, and I will see you in a few days.